Welcome to this video. We're going to talk about a really important concept in trading, the concept of a trend, and, most importantly, the 3 trading trends. One of the most popular quotes in trading, if you're not familiar with it, is that the trend is your friend. This means that it's always better to position yourself in the direction of the trend rather than against the trend in order to earn money on the financial markets. It's a bit like surfing. To catch the wave, you have to go in the direction of the wave in order to surf it. But if you try to swim against the wave and take it, all you'll do is drown. A similar principle applies with trends in trading. There are 3 different kinds of trends. The first is an upward trend, which is characterized by high points and low points which are increasingly high. You can see on the diagram that the peaks and troughs are always higher than the previous peaks and troughs, which indicates, quite simply, an upward trend. So in this case, you should therefore buy the asset using Arya since the market demand and the stakeholders' view is quite bullish and is stronger than a sale position. Then there is the second trend, which is the downward trend, which is characterized this time by low points and high points which are increasingly low. You can see on the diagram that the peaks and troughs in red are lower than the previous peaks and troughs. In this case, unlike what we saw a moment ago, you should sell the asset because the market demand is therefore stronger for a sale, or less strong than when buying. And thirdly, there is the trend which we describe as a range, which is actually market indecision. There is no specific direction set by the market. Quite simply, the price of the financial asset will change between support and resistance, which are horizontal, and this is a situation where the market is indecisive concerning the direction it will take. So now a really important question to ask is, what are the trends that give the highest chances of making money on the stock exchange, and which offer the highest gains? That's what we really need to ask. Upward and downward trends offer the best opportunities. It is more or less upward and downward trends that make it possible to make money. While in a range trend, it is still possible to make money, but it takes a good level of skill, and if you're a beginner, just focusing on finding financial assets that are clearly in upward or downward trends and leave aside assets in a range trend, which are therefore undergoing a market correction. So, how can I determine a financial asset's trend? There are 2 main ways of doing this. On the one hand, use the technical indicators that will analyze the price that will allow you to visually understand if we are in a trend. This is the case, most notably, with the moving average. And the other way of doing this is to identify the support and resistance zones which are present. Here, on the diagram I'm showing you, you have the graph for an asset and you can see that we are clearly in an upward trend, and I drew a support line on which the price rebounded at least 3 times. We can clearly see the upward trend with this lovely support, which we call a trend line. It's also interesting to see, as I said at the beginning of this video, the trend is your friend until it ends, okay? Is a trend infinite? Can a trading trend last forever? The answer is no. Can a trend change at any time? This time, the answer is yes. On the illustration I'm showing you at the moment, you can see that we were in an upward trend until the market reached a strategic resistance, when the rise clearly stopped, and we clearly entered into a range phase. The range is a market consolidation which, in simple terms, gives the market the time to digest this rise and just allows the market to breathe. It's a bit like a marathon. When you run very fast, but after a while you need to breathe, your heart is beating so fast you need to take a break. Well, it's exactly the same thing with trading. There are 2 possible ways out of a market correction, or a range. Either the price begins increasing again in a new upward trend, or the price will begin decreasing in a downward trend. To identify these trend changes, you will use technical indicators that allow you to understand these changes in direction. We will look at that in detail in the coming modules. We'll look at how to clearly use the indicators provided with the Arya template to identify the current trend. Right. I wanted to go a bit further as well with my explanations of the 3 trading trends. We saw and we talked about the upward trend, the downward trend, and also the range. I think it's a good idea to share the graphs with you and then to talk about some different examples about how the market actually reacts to trends. The first point is, of course, the upward trend. We talked about that. It's when the high points and the low points are, in the end, getting higher and higher. It's very easy in Arya, because thanks to the technical indicators and especially in the fractals, which we'll talk about in the coming videos, just here, you see, the high point and the low point have been identified. In fact, what we are seeing is that it is increasingly high. So if we had to trace a sort of line, like this, on the high points and the low points, if we simply had to connect, let's say, these high points and these low points, what we can see is these low points are, simply put, increasingly high. We can do the same thing this way. It's really interesting to show you that it's quite easy to illustrate, like that, a trend and where the high points and low points are. And here, we can see very clearly that the market, in fact, is in this upward trend. So that's the first thing. We also talked about how the trend is your friend. Obviously, there is always a time when the trend, the dynamism, will always prove you right. So you must always trade in the direction of the trend. That means that when you identify a buying trend, you buy. When you identify a selling trend, you sell. What you must always tell yourself is that a nice trend is fantastic, and you will make money with Arya. But at some point, the market will stop being in an upward or downward trend and will enter a range without any real dynamism. That's exactly what's happening. There you see, just to the right. I'm going to show you, using rectangles, that will be a lot easier for us. So here, we had our upward trend, which can be seen there, and what can we see just after? We have a range, so a flat market, which actually just allows the market to take a breath and say, okay, I went really fast. There you can see it just here with a lovely candlestick, just here. Now I need to breathe and take some time to decide what direction I'm going in. That's sort of the idea with this upward trend. And then we can go forward a bit. Here we actually have a beautiful downward trend which has appeared just here. So it's the same thing. You see the high points and the low points are increasingly low this time, and we can identify the lines quite easily, like this, to determine the trend. In this market situation, we sell, of course. Each time we sell because we are in a downward trend. And what do you see once again? It's sort of the opposite example of what I showed you a few seconds ago. In this downward trend, at some point, the market needs to breathe. Of course, I could show you things in an easier way. Let's put it like that. In other words, your downward trend, we identified it like that, and afterwards the range. We can, in fact, just make the line a bit bigger. But that's sort of the idea with the range here. This flat market is very clear. The market's waiting to decide what to do next. Right, so if you remember one thing, remember that for an upward trend, the high points and the lower points are increasingly high, and for a downward trend, the high points and low points are increasingly low. Market stagnation is where the high points and the low points are mixed together without any real, let's say, direction demonstrated by the price. Once you have a trend, remember that at some point the trend will peter out since the market obviously needs to breathe.